Brilliant. Welcome to the next in the lunchtime webinar sessions. I'm Rob Webben, and so we've got about 15 minutes to hear from someone amazing in our network. And today we're hearing from Pamela, who I'll introduce shortly. And it's really just learning from incredible people about the work they do, whether that's athletes or supply chain specialists, anything across the whole gamut of the kind of the network of people that we interact with. So because these sessions are so short, there aren't time for questions, I'm afraid. But if you do have a question, drop it into the chat and we'll try to get around to it. If not, then I'm sure Pamela will answer it afterwards. We'll share information at the end about how you can learn more or get in contact or find out more about everything that Pamela's working on. So I'm super happy to be able to introduce Pamela Ravasio. I hope I've pronounced the surname right, Pamela.
Very well done.
And you're a supply chain ethics and sustainability specialist. So I was introduced to you by our mutual friend in the industry, Charles, who's just dropped off the video. And I have to say, personally, I find sitting on a call with you gives me massive imposter syndrome for all the right reasons, because you're so knowledgeable. It just blows my mind. So I'm really excited to kind of introduce you to our network and our community, hear more about you and your background, but then also where you think we need to go. So if you don't mind, perhaps if you can give us a 1-minute introduction to yourself, your background, and what brings you to this point in career.
So my name is Pamela. I'm very, very, very originally a trained computer scientist, gone rogue. About 15 years ago, I had one of those moments where I just didn't see any difference that I was making in the world, and a bit by coincidence then sort of got roped into first charity work, and then sort of realized that there was more to business than what I was aware of. And that brings me in a sense already to the big idea. So I'm a fundamental believer in business as a force for good, even if it's more often than not really hard to believe that this is possible. In my spare time, I like sitting outside, alpine tours, ski touring, hiking, backpacking, first and foremost, interrailing, all those kind of things, and mostly alone.
And you're in the right place for it, right? I mean, do you want to tell people where you are?
I'm right around Zurich. That's what I call home. I've just come back a couple of weeks ago from a 2-week workation trip on Interrail to Galicia and back, all on train, and it was great fun.
Oh, that's amazing. Workation, that's a new one on me. I like it.
Taking the laptop and doing the best you can to take a holiday when you really don't manage to.
Yeah, well, that's holidays, isn't it? Amazing, brilliant, thank you. So we're going to be talking about business as a force for good then. So yeah. So that's kind of the big discussion, and I think we'll have about 10 minutes on that, and the 10 minutes will fly past. But I would love to hear your thoughts on how we as a business community can start taking positive steps, whether it's from the point of view of a company that really hasn't engaged in sustainability or social change to date, or whether one that's quite along the line. I mean, where do you come in and help businesses like ours change and improve?
Yeah, I mean, with Presco's hard, isn't it? It's like you guys do so many good things like that. If it was for Presco Sports, where I could happily go in early retirement and do something completely else. So I think there are different ways how to look at that. So there's one way of how to look at, I would say, a P&L in a different way. We define a P&L as being successful if your EBITDA is doing well and your turnover after discounting all the expenses and so on and so forth is doing really well. My view on that is it's actually a wrong way to look at things. A business, in my view, is successful if it contributes employment, if it contributes to community, if it contributes tax, because it also profits off the infrastructure a country is building. So in a sense, tax is a way to return that favor to the country that you're profiting from. So this is the way I personally interpret success of a business. In a much more relevant way. Now, this is obviously a conversation that not every company is open to. Let's be very clear to that, and sort of that opens a thing from the breadth of companies that exist, sort of more the Presco Sportswear that are really on the cutting edge And part of that conversation, how would we redefine the definition of what success is? Whereas you've got the other side of the coin, the other extreme, there are those that very much have a big stake on this traditional definition of success, which is EBITDA and your GDP contribution in a sense. Now, it's a very different conversation to talk to those, even if they're committed in quotation marks to sustainability. In the old style or traditional style conversation, the conversation will always be a conversation around return on invest to a certain extent or other. Yeah, now we can maybe stretch that terminology a bit, that it's not purely financial returns, so there is qualitative returns on the invest as well, but fundamentally there's a return on invest. So what is the biggest bang for the buck that you get, whether that's employee engagement, whether that is hiring talent, whether that is controlling your supply chain, better materials, better quality, whatever else it is. And risk plays a very big role. So controlling risk and risk exposure plays a really big role, and risk also means forward-looking risk. So
that's interesting. Do you think that risk point plays into how we as a sustainability-focused business community can engage more with the traditional kind of just shareholder value type businesses, in terms of actually your shareholder value will be vastly diminished by what's coming down the line. So now's the time to act and be super positive and proactive.
Absolutely. And I mean, if you listen a little bit into how the conversation goes in the finance industry, it is basically about risks. And in fact, it's like just today I got a newsletter through from Responsible Steel. So that's sort of the certification for better steel. And there was a whole article around, we've got now the first sort of research results around stranded assets in the steel sector. Now, that's not unique to the steel sector. There's the first coal plants barely built and already decommissioned in Australia because it's basically a stranded asset. There's a similar plant also in Australia for gas. So that's the kind of risk that we're talking about, right? It's quite tangible in most cases, not in every case, but it's quite tangible. Another set of risk is what comes down from the legislator. And 3 days ago, we had a first agreement, for instance, in the EU about the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, that now firmly says all stock-listed companies, also the SMEs, and there are significant in smaller markets in particular. So if we look at Sweden or Switzerland, well, Switzerland is outside the EU, but the size of Switzerland, you have smallish company that are stock listed. All of them will have to report. They will have to report electronically. They will have to have those sustainability accounts audited by an accredited auditor, similar to your P&L.
Yeah.
So these are the kind of risks. If you don't see them coming, then you have a problem. And that's really sort of the kind of conversation where I think it's different perspectives, but the skin in the game is not dissimilar. It's just the language around is being used differently.
So do you think, where is the most power in this? How do we influence more people? Is it the consumer demand saying, hold on a minute, I want zero carbon steel, and it must be in our cars or whatever? Or is it consumer demand? Is it the risk and the financial discussion? Is there something else that's another big lever? I mean, it feels like it's everything, isn't it, really? But where do you think the biggest impetus can come from for change?
I think it's a combination of two things, and I'm not saying anything new here. It's always a combination of both fear, or if you want, that's the whip, and then the carrot.
Yeah.
So fear is the whip. So fear that you're either not going to be surviving as a company, or that your children are going to be having a miserable future or something like that. But on the other hand, you've got the carrot, and the carrot is, if you want, the imagination or the vision that a different future is possible, and the motivation to make that different future possible for, if not for ourselves. I mean, I'm in the second half of my 40s. Chances are I might not see of that very much anymore, most likely. But people like Europe who've got small children, they will see effects of that, maybe not themselves, but you know that you have children that will have to live through whatever is coming.
Yeah.
And I think that gives a slightly different perspective as well on the motivation of wanting to get things done and really having skin in the game. I mean, there are occasionally people like me who just kind of tick that way. And I mean, that's just the way I'm born, the way I'm made up in that sense. But for other people, it needs that extra skin in the game through their own descendants to make that difference.
Yeah, I think you're completely right. So, we're wired the same, Pamela, but I think we're probably in a minority, which is why we're kind of in this mess. But I think, like you say, there's nothing. So I'm petrified, if I'm perfectly honest, petrified about the future of my little girls. There's nothing more motivating than that. And I think, for maybe one of the older generations, kind of grandparents, seeing their kids coming home from school saying, "Grandma, do your recycling properly," or, we should be eating a bit less beef, or, all those kind of things. That's where change happens. That's what can be really motivating for people at a personal level.
Absolutely.
Do you see? I knew this would happen. We're kind of just almost 10 minutes into the chat already, and I'm going to start winding up soon. But have you seen like real genuine change since you've started this role in focusing on businesses and change into business for good? Have you seen change over the last however many years?
Oh yeah. I mean, as slow as it seems in the present, I've got nearly 15 years of sustainability work under my belt. And I've been told I was crazy back in the days. So we're talking sort of second half of the 2000s, and still until I would say a year and a half-ish, 2 years before the pandemic hit, people would talk sustainability, but they really wouldn't do very much. It was slow going. It was tedious. It was a constant uphill battle. And it was prior to the pandemic, by the way, that suddenly there was a shift change happening. I think at least in Europe, the shift change partly had to do with the discussion at EU levels, that progressively some of the cogwheels were cranked ever tighter. But I think it's also slowly, the message is hitting home that this is not a game we're in. This is for real. We really have skin in the game. The numbers that they give us in terms of timelines we have aren't fake either, that they're real. And in summer like the one we have this year or the one that we had last year, it's, even though that's weather and not climate, it's like it starts to hit things home that things are very, very different than they used to be.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, and I'm seeing change in the industry we're in. When we started, there wasn't even a discussion about sustainability. It wasn't even a thing, and we were out there going, "Do you want to see a jersey made from recycled plastic bottles? How cool is this?" And people were like, "Really?" And it's so much change in the last 2 or 3 years, which is really positive. So much more to do, for sure.
And now suddenly everyone in leopard speed has become an expert in sustainability.
I know.
It's really interesting.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. And suddenly everyone wants these recycled fabrics, which is brilliant, but now it makes us, gives us some problems, but that's an aside. Look, Pamela, I would like to ask you 3 kind of rapid fire questions that we do every week. I know 10 minutes have gone past, or 15 minutes nearly so quickly, but what does community mean to you?
Well, community means for me, on the one hand, an absence on something, and that's the absence of envy. So you support each other without the envy. You're actually proud of other people's success. So that's one piece. And the other side of it is also, it's to go by Bette Midler's song, it's the wind beneath my wings. So it's the piece that even in the toughest of times gets you to fly and take off and still try, even in rough winds, have a go once more.
Oh, I love that. I suspect we're going to struggle to find anyone who gives a better answer about community. Thank you. Why should we care about the climate?
Well, I would say if we want to survive as a human species, that's the one thing. Planet Earth will be doing just fine. Some of the more prettier animals are not going to make it. We're not going to be making it. But besides that, it's not so important.
Just that little thing. Okay, and let's flip it then. What makes you feel positive?
Being positive is a decision. So you have to, in the current situation and climate, pun intended, you have to actually decide in the morning to be positive and make an effort to create change. And for those that don't know, it is like there is a podcast from the lady that was leading the Paris Climate Agreement negotiations around precisely that topic. It's called
Outrage and Optimism.
There we go. Outrage and Optimism. It's like,
one of my favorites.
And it's absolutely recommended. It's really that point is you get up in the morning and decide to be positive, because anything else just doesn't work.
Yes, 100%. Oh, brilliant. I love that. I totally recommend Outrage and Optimism, as you do. If you are a fan of podcasts, I'd also suggest, if you're interested in UK politics, which is, I know, very specific, but also suggest listen to The Rest is Politics, which is a podcast from two guys from different sides of the political spectrum, Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell. But they're so great. They really have, they come to the discussion with very open ears, and it's so refreshing to hear politics discussed from people who really know what they're talking about, but also aren't just arguing with each other. That's a complete aside. Pamela is really brilliant. I'm sorry this has lasted, just gone so quickly, but it's been fantastic to hear from you. And for our audience, how can people find out more about you?
Well, you find me on LinkedIn. With my first and last name. I'm the only one on LinkedIn for now with that name. And I do have a website, which is predominantly a blog. It's called Shirahime. That's written Shirahime, comes from a white princess in Japanese. Long story how to get there, but that's where you find me.
Amazing. Thank you. So there we are. Brilliant. Thank you, Pamela.
Thank you very much, everyone.
We've learned that business can be a force for good, and I think, you know, with people like you driving that change, Pamela, you know, it really can happen. So if you are a business looking for support in being a lot better, then you know who to speak to, 100%. And we've also learned that workcation is a thing. That's pretty cool. I've never heard of that, but I love it. I'm going to try and do a bit of that. Brilliant. Thank you for your time. If you've enjoyed today's session, so next week we've got another amazing guest. So we've got Maren Krings, she's a photographer, but she's also become a leading expert on hemp and all the positives for society that we could derive from this amazing plant. So come along to listen to that one. I'm super excited. Until then, have a brilliant weekend. Go and hit the trails, spend time with your loved ones, do things that make you happy and positive, so you can come back on Monday and start changing the world again. Brilliant. Pamela, thank you.
Bye, everyone. Take care. Thank you for being here.
Bye-bye.